So up until a couple days ago, Red Bull, or AlphaTauri rather, had a problem. And while yes, it did involve Dr. Helmut Marko, it did not involve his transient mouth. Which is a nice change. Marko is entrusted with the Red Bull driver development program and ultimately makes the call on who gets the call up to the AlphaTauri Formula 1 team, the sister team to the supposed evil empire of Red Bull Racing. And up until recently, he had a dilemma where there were at least 3 very credible drivers to choose from, but only 2 seats available. Now the decision has been made, and needless to say, it hasn't been popular with everybody. So how did we get here? Is this the right call? And have I finished crying yet? Well, to that last one, no. But that ain't why we're here. So stick around, let's have a look at this f***ing mess that is AlphaTauri. So back in 2022, when the world was not that much better, AlphaTauri had the driver pairing of Yuki Tsunoda and Pierre Gasly. Not too much wrong with that driver pairing, and unless they had Sir Lewis Hamilton barging in asking for a drive for whatever reason, there wasn't much logic in replacing either of these guys. Having said that, AlphaTauri, despite having won 2 Grand Prix, have never been a proper race-winning team. They've always been the Ringo Starr to Red Bull's John Lennon. Or in another way, it's like comparing Charles Leclerc to Arthur Leclerc. If a driver in this team can find a better opportunity elsewhere on the grid, somewhere where their ambitions may have a better chance at being realized, then they're going to take the bait however it comes. After Fernando Alonso and Oscar Piastri kicked off some highly explosive silly season gymnastics midway through that year, the Alpine Formula 1 team were on the hunt for another driver. And so Gasly, seeing the investment and projected uptick in form for the team, signed the dotted line for Alpine and told the Red Bull family, "Peace out, messieurs." The departure of Gasly meant a seat was opened up at a team that typically heralded the arrival of a brand new talent into Formula 1. The vast majority of the time a driver gets signed to AlphaTauri, it's a rookie. More specifically, one that's in the Red Bull Junior team. And they had a few to choose from. Dennis Hauger, Isaac Hadjar, Liam Lawson, and Ayumu Uwasa, just to name a few. And all were fantastic prospects for sure. But Marko seems to like making life difficult for himself. He didn't really like any of those drivers. In fact, he didn't think any of them were ready for Formula 1. Oh man, whose fault is that? Could it be, oh geez, could it be the head of the driver development program? And who is that again? Yeah, but it can just take that one good race weekend for the team bosses up and down the paddock to sit up and take notice. And eventually that did happen, but not for Dennis or Isaac or Liam or Yumu, but for someone else entirely. At the Italian Grand Prix, Williams were beset with the typical issue of Nicholas Latifi being left for dead and out of the points. All the while, his teammate was up ahead and in the points. That on its own wasn't atypical, but the person driving that particular weekend was in his Formula 1 debut. Coming in at such short notice, his performance was praised by everyone in the paddock. It had been a long time coming for this lad, and finally, he could show what he could do. After seeing that performance and already seeing a nice steady cash flow coming in from Dutch fans, Marko handed over 40 sheets of paper and a pencil. And so AlphaTauri's second driver for 2023 would be Nick de Vries. And what followed was a disaster so catastrophic that no one could quite believe it, as de Vries' Formula 1 career crashed and burned into the ground in just 10 races. Marko's reason for dropping him? Well, he wasn't all that was cracked up to be, apparently. Not uncommon for Marko to let drivers go because of that, but 10 races. Far out, bruh. Even to a guy like me, that's cold. It did seem that his mind was made up pretty early on, but a tyre test conducted by Red Bull mere days after the weekend was the final nail in the proverbial coffin. Marko called de Vries during the test and told him that his services were no longer required, that he was to be replaced, and that his replacement was the man driving in that tyre test, who wowed those in the garage with just how fast he managed to jump back into the saddle. It was the honey badger. It was Daniel Ricciardo. While it was a raw deal for de Vries, the return of Daniel Ricciardo gave F1 fans around the world a sort of warm, fuzzy feeling. Like remembering that Cap Anson is dead. There was some conjecture about why a Red Bull Jr. was not given a chance, in particular Liam Lawson, who was already the team's reserve driver. But ultimately it would have been asking too much of any young driver. They would have been thrown massively into the deep end. It's better to go with the experience here and give the young rookie a chance later on down the line, when they have a few months to prepare, rather than just a few days. And it did seem as if this tactic was paying dividends. It wasn't as if Ricciardo was winning races or destroying supervillains, but he was at least keeping within range of his teammate and keeping it out of the walls. Well, most of the time. During FP2 for the Dutch Grand Prix, Ricciardo attempted to avoid having a crash with Piastri and instead had one of his own. It was almost certainly the right move, but in the process, he injured his left hand. A broken metacarpal bone forced him out of the race. Well, The next few races, actually. Despite the wondrous workings of some of motor racing's finest witch doctors, AlphaTauri were going to need a replacement for him. Some thought Nick de Vries would be drafted back in, but ultimately, Marco and co decided to take a punt on one of their juniors, the one who was already assigned as reserve driver for the team, who cruelly missed out on his maiden chance earlier in lieu of Ricciardo himself. The chance that Formula One had come for Liam Lawson. Commandeering the car midway through the weekend, the only aims he would have had is to qualify the car and keep it out of the walls. And he did that. Barely. Pace relative to his teammate was... yeah. But during that race, one could see the progress he was making in terms of getting up to pace. And it was all very good, and frankly, that was all you really could have expected out of him, because those circumstances were... rancid. At the next race in Monza, he was starting to get into the groove. People were beginning to acknowledge him. And then in the next race in Singapore, a race that is physically akin to running in a sauna for 2 hours, a track that he's never driven on before, he out-qualified every other Red Bull driver, including one Max Verstappen, came home in 9th position, and scored his first points in Formula One. Since this extraordinary result, people have been quick to praise the Kiwi and say that he unquestionably deserves a place in Formula One, that anything less than a full-time drive in the series for 2024 would be a travesty. But I'm not 1,000,000% sure on all of this. I'll explain what I mean by that in a second. And now we have arrived at the point where the powers that be needed to make a choice on their drivers, and they have done. AlphaTauri's 2024 lineup will be Yuki Tsunoda and Daniel Ricciardo. Liam Lawson, though, has nothing.
You get nothing. You lose. Good day, sir.
Way to take the wind out of our sails. Now, as of the recording of this video, nothing here is official, but irrespective, is the prospect of Liam Lawson being left out of AlphaTauri a travesty? Kinda, sorta, not really. Overall, the whole scenario is understandable. There is actually quite a bit of logic behind this, because Yuki hasn't really put a foot wrong this year. For what reason, really, could you think about cutting him loose? And on the other side of the garage, Ricciardo has something else going for him. For 2024, AlphaTauri will be undergoing some changes. Namely, the team won't be called AlphaTauri anymore, but instead will be changed to Balls Racing, or Hugo Boss Balls Racing, or Hugo Boss Big Balls Racing. I don't know. Should have just gone back to Minardi. All of this is part of a restructuring effort for the team next year, which will see the main hub move to the UK in an effort to allow for better collaboration with the main Red Bull team and to save money. But hey, if you can earn a little more money on the side to go with it, that's hardly a bad thing. And Ricciardo is a marketable guy. Very marketable, actually. Everything from media appearances to merchandise sales to... fan fiction? You can bet your bottom dollar that dragging Ricciardo into the team will have companies drooling over themselves to send money their way. And despite his horrific drowning at McLaren, Ricciardo is a good peddler. Mans hasn't forgotten how to drive, and his 12 or is it 13? I don't know. Years of experience will come in handy when it comes to the car's development. So to have these two picked over Liam Lawson is not really crazy, but it is still a mess. And I am patriotic and disgustingly biased, so I want to talk about this. Liam's first 3 races in a Formula One car has led to people calling for him to get a permanent seat on the grid, saying that his performances were stellar and that he's the real deal. And while yes, I do believe he should be on the grid full-time next year, my reaction to his performances thus far are a little more tempered. Reason being, Liam never really had a benchmark in Italy or Singapore, seeing as how Yuki never turned a lap in either of them. In Monza because of Italian electricity, and in Singapore due to an itchy Checo who, for some reason, went on a killing spree in that race. So it is hard to tell where he's really at. And with Marco absolutely butchering the Nick de Vries scenario, you can understand why he'd be a little bit skittish about this. I mean, who's to say this won't go sour too? Even if, unlike de Vries, Liam's first performances have been in an AlphaTauri, and they have been impressing people in the team. He's had more than one outing with them, and you can tell he's only going to get better. But alas, that's not enough apparently. Now, I know what some of you will be thinking, what about Checo? What's to be done with him and his drowning? Well, all that's for another time, and he does have a contract for Red Bull for 2024, although he knows as well as anybody that contracts don't mean diddly in Formula One. And also, putting up a rookie greener than goose against Max? That's straight up sending the lamb to the slaughter. It would never work, no matter how good they are. Despite reports floating around, he can't go to Williams next year either, because it does look set that they'll be sticking with their driver lineup even with problems with one of its drivers. So unless something drastic happens between now and 2025, this is the last that we'll see of Liam Lawson in a Formula One car. That's a shame. And it's a sham. And it all stems from Helmut Marko's complete inaptitude at his job. How many times is this guy going to totally butcher the job at hand? Or are we going to pretend that his decision-making process is good when he's more impulsive than Elizabeth Taylor in the 50s? The whole mess at AlphaTauri stems from this, and it's been like this for a while. And frankly, the only way I see this being fixed is if we keep Yuki at AlphaTauri, bring Lawson in to partner him there, take Ricciardo over to Red Bull, fire Max, and switch the teams around halfway through the season. A foolproof plan. Or at least, it seems like something that Marco would do. Maybe I'm interpreting the whole thing wrong. Even so, what a mess.